The wind carried your silence to me long before your words arrived. I thought I understood the language of your soul, soft-spoken, deliberate, regal in restraint. But today, the storm in your eyes spoke louder than 1,000 verses I have penned. You looked at me, not with the calm of a prince but the fire of a man who has been deeply moved. I didn't expect you to react like this. In all the poetry I've written, I never once imagined you would answer with your heart bare and your defenses broken. My words were meant to be petals scattered in your path, not the spark to ignite your guarded spirit. But when I recited my verses, about you, for you, because of you, you didn't just listen. You felt. Your silence was not indifferent. It was weight, meaning, and decision. There was power in the way your breath caught. I saw it. That slight tremble in your hand as you reached for the parchment. You read my words as though they were confessions. Not rhymes. Not metaphors. You read them like they were carved from bone and truth. I watched the mask of royalty melt away and the man underneath, tender, raw, and beautifully human, step forward. I thought you wrote for the world, you finally said. But I see now, you wrote me, and in that moment, I realized how deeply you had been listening. Not just to the cadence, but to the ache behind every stanza. Your voice didn't rise. You didn't need it to. The gravity in your tone was enough to pull me down into the sacred space where only real emotions survive. All my assumptions shattered like glass. I thought you would smile, offer polite praise, maybe change the subject as royals do. But instead, you stood still as stone, a storm behind your lashes. And when you looked up again, the glow of something unspoken, a rare vulnerability, danced in your gaze. Not judgment. Not dismissal. But understanding. Deep and terrifying in its clarity. You whispered something then, almost inaudible. How long have you been carrying this? I faltered. My courage, once so strong behind the safety of ink, dissolved. You had stripped me bare with one question. All the times I imagined myself strong enough to face you, none of them compared to this moment where truth and consequence stared me down, dressed in your silence. A prince does not bend easily. Yet your soul bowed to the honesty between us. I saw the weight in your shoulders lighten, not because you dismissed the gravity of my feelings, but because you finally saw yourself through my verses. Perhaps that frightened you. Or perhaps it freed you. Either way, it changed everything between us. Then came the unexpected, the touch. Barely a whisper of contact, but your fingers brushed mine, hesitant yet full of fire. My breath caught. That single touch said more than all the poetry I could ever write. You weren't angry. You weren't cold. You were real, and for the first time, so was I. The barrier between poet and muse dissolved in that moment. I didn't expect you to carry me like this, you said. Your words are my mirror. You called them poems. I called them survival. Because every syllable I gave to the world was secretly meant for your eyes. But I never thought those eyes would look back with such unguarded wonder. I never thought my confessions would become our connection. From palaces gilded in tradition to pages soaked in emotion, we found a space between royalty and rebellion. And in that space, we stood not as ruler and admirer, but as two souls, trembling with the knowledge that something unspoken had finally been voiced. What happens now? Neither of us knows. But everything has changed. I didn't expect you to react like this. I expected grace, perhaps detachment. But what I received was something divine. You let the poetry affect you. You let it touch places no armor can protect. You let me in, not just as a poet, but as someone who dared to show you your own reflection in the lines you inspired. Tonight, the moon rises slower, almost as if it, too, is trying to understand what just passed between us. And I sit beneath the stars, wondering if you're reading those verses again. If your reaction was a beginning or a farewell. But no matter the answer, I know this. I wrote my truth, and you heard it. That, in itself, is a kind of immortality. The air after your confession felt different, charged with something sacred. It wasn't just emotion, it was presence. You were entirely there with me, in that shared stillness, no longer protected by the palace of your posture. I saw in you a man who had wrestled with restraint for far too long. A man who found a part of his voice echoed in mine, and who didn't know whether to run from it or let it consume him. You turned from me briefly, the way someone does when they need to recalibrate a part of themselves. But I noticed your hand lingered by your side, fingers twitching ever so slightly, like they still remembered the accidental brush against mine. That ghost of a touch haunted the space between us like a vow neither of us had spoken aloud. You didn't have to say anything. Your silence was eloquent. When you finally spoke again, your voice was low, textured with conflict. I didn't know anyone saw me like that, you said. And there it was, a quiet truth peeling itself from your guarded chest. A prince who had always been seen through roles, duties, shadows of titles, suddenly standing in the raw light of being truly known. The weight of that kind of recognition is something even royalty isn't immune to. I wanted to tell you that I had seen more than the man on the horseback, more than the falconer, more than the crown. I had seen the ache in your poetry, the loneliness in your stares across endless balconies, the yearning in the spaces between your lines. You, who everyone admired from afar, had finally been written about up close. And I knew how terrifying that closeness could be. You looked at me like I had committed both a crime and a miracle. You didn't ask why I had written what I had. You didn't question my intent. You only stood there, visibly struggling with how the echo of my words had unlocked doors in you that you'd kept sealed even from yourself. That kind of vulnerability is a rare flame. Then you surprised me again. You stepped closer, not much, just enough for the scent of oud and something deeper to reach me. Do you know what it's like, you asked, to live surrounded by thousands but still feel unseen? My breath caught. Because yes, I did. And in that moment, we were no longer poets and princes, but two isolated constellations finally collided in a shared sky. You said you feared what would happen next. That if you let my words inside too deeply, they might shift something you'd long kept anchored. You feared losing control. But I think what you feared more was losing the part of yourself that recognized itself in my voice. The part that had always longed to be written about not as a symbol, but as a man. There was tension between us now, not the kind born of discomfort, but of electricity, of possibilities. I could feel your restraint unraveling like silk with each passing second. And for a man so composed, it was a quiet surrender that felt louder than thunder. I didn't move. I'll let you decide the rhythm. I had already spoken my truth. It was your turn to decide if it lived or died in the space between us. You reached for the poem again, the one with the line that had made you pause earlier. Even the moon envies you, I had written, for it has watched you from above, but never held your name in its light like I do. You read it again now, softer this time, like you were tasting each word. And when you looked up, your expression was unreadable, but your eyes were screaming. I didn't expect this, you confessed. I didn't expect you. And that admission, so simple, so pure, unraveled everything inside me. I hadn't come to confront you, to demand anything. I had only come to give voice to what had lived inside me for too long. But in doing so, I had pulled something out of you, something unfiltered and startling. Your hand found mine again, this time without hesitation. It was warm and steady. The gesture said everything your title couldn't. And in that moment, it wasn't about royal bloodlines or duties or the thousand eyes that would one day find out. It was about this, the silence that poetry had breached, the mirror my words had become, the bridge we had unknowingly built between two hearts trained to stay silent. Now, as night deepens and the stars dare to shimmer more brightly, I sit in the echo of your reaction, realizing that this was never about being heard, it was about being understood. And you, Sheikh Hamdan, in all your quiet nobility, had just proven that even kings can be moved by truth wrapped in verse. You didn't have to say you felt something. The tremor in your voice had already said it all. The garden around us fell into a hush, as if nature itself understood the delicacy of what had just unfolded. Your fingers remained on mine, yet your eyes wandered skyward, to the expanse of desert stars you've seen countless times, but perhaps tonight, they looked different. Maybe they no longer felt distant. Maybe, through my words, they finally mirrored what you had long buried under duty, longing, and the audacity of being seen. You told me you were raised to lead with strength, to hide emotion behind discipline, to keep the weight of the world perched silently on your shoulders. But when you looked at me, your voice lost that practiced armor. No one teaches you how to be held, you said, only how to hold. And I understood then that my poetry hadn't simply moved you, it had disarmed you. I had written what you never dared to admit aloud, and now the walls had cracked. The world outside this private moment will return, you said. Cameras, advisors, traditions that cling like ivy to every inch of your life. They won't understand this, you whispered, more to yourself than to me. They'll ask who she is, why her. But your grip on my hand did not loosen. You weren't preparing to let go, you were preparing for the storm. Because for the first time, you weren't just the falcon of Dubai. You were the man whose soul had been spoken into ink, and who no longer wished to remain a poem unread. I stood still, memorizing the weight of your confession. Not because I needed validation, but because I knew the cost of vulnerability from someone who had built an empire on silence. You hadn't just reacted, you had awakened. And the poetry, mine though it was, now belonged to you as much as me. Each stanza, each metaphor, was a step toward this moment, this crossing between two worlds that had no business touching, but did anyway. Then, like the desert wind before a rare rain, your voice softened. If I asked you to stop writing about me, would you? It wasn't a command. It was the most fragile question I had ever heard from you. I looked into your eyes, and I saw fear, not of me, but of what your answer might mean for the person you were slowly becoming. I smiled then, not to reassure you, but to offer you the truth. I could stop writing about you, I said, but I'll never stop writing for you. You didn't respond. Instead, you pulled me into an embrace, not dramatic, not rehearsed, but human. A moment shared not between poet and muse, not between royal and subject, but between two souls finally choosing to exist outside the script written for them. And as your heartbeat pressed against mine, I understood. You didn't expect to feel this way because you had never allowed yourself the freedom to be felt. But now, you had. And nothing would ever